Yes, bring in the digressions. You know, you don't even have to follow rabbit tracks here. You can make up your own. But, Mr. Speaker, in commending the bill to the House, I would like to formally place on record my thanks to members of the Nova Scotia Department of Agriculture. Mr. Speaker, and this afternoon, in fact, with the Nova Scotia Department of Agriculture, my communication director, Celeste Sullivan, is in the. Hello, Celeste. And Leo Muse is in the gallery as well. And there are a couple of individuals that make life for the minister and his staff very, very much easier. And just want to acknowledge their hard work in putting together this piece of legislation. I know that you two folks have worked tirelessly, have canvassed, have spoken with the SPCA. And we want to as well, and I think I did earlier, commend the Nova Scotia SPCA, the Nova Scotia Veterinarian Medical Association, and the Nova Scotia Federation of Agriculture, whose commitment, energy, and advice have been instrumental in ensuring this bill could become a reality, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, as this bill moves through the House, I am extremely interested in what the colleagues opposite will have to say about this piece of legislation. You know, the fact that the bill is being improved upon and having substantive changes made obviously will elicit some debate from the folks opposite. And you know, I trust that my colleagues realize that we are open to suggestion. We want to work in a collaborative fashion as the bill moves along through the House, and that's always been the way. The leader of the opposition understands that, and I'm sure that the critics have been advised accordingly that you know that this is a piece of legislation, an Animal Protection Act that does need support, but when you're talking about the welfare and safety of animals in the province, it is a significant concern to Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker. And my government is working to ensure the protection and humane treatment of animals in the province is something that isn't taken lightly. And the goal of the new bill is to ensure a more effective enforcement of animal cruelty violations. The new Act ensures greater public accountability on the part of the department and on the part of the SPCA. And Mr. Speaker, I indicated earlier that we have spoken with the Nova Scotia Federation of Agriculture, and I do want to say that they are especially pleased with the change that identifies the Department of Agriculture as the department, as the folks responsible for managing the investigations of suspected farm animal abuse. Now, Mr. Speaker, we have farms all over the country, and in fact, farming is the backbone of rural Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. Now, I know that I only need to take a short drive up Route 224 in the beautiful Musquodoboit Valley, and Mr. Speaker, you don't get very far before you'll see a beef farm, Mr. Speaker, with 50 or 60 head of cattle, and you may go down the 357 out through Murkyville, Mr. Speaker, and you could see some more cattle. And in fact, if you go out Murkyville out the Conrad Road, you will see a large dairy farm. Yes, a large dairy farm. And Mr. Speaker, you could. I know the Minister of Community Services is very aware of that neck of the woods, Mr. Speaker, and Mr. Speaker, let's see, 212, I believe it is, Route 212. Her kinfolk, some of her kinfolk at least, reside on Route 212, and sometimes that's referred to as the Old Guysborough Road, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, there's farming along the Route 212, but there's a lot of farming right in the Musquodoboit Valley. You know, Mr. Speaker, about 17 years ago, I had the privilege of being elected to Halifax County Council as a municipal councillor. And Mr. Speaker, we'd like to say at that particular time, and in fact brag, that the only farming that actually takes place in Halifax County was in District 12. And District 12, at that particular time, essentially ran from Carroll's Corner up to Dean to the Colchester County line, and I think down Elderbank and Myers Grant was included in the old District 12. And Mr. Speaker, I think that's the case today. I think that's still the case today as far as the geography goes in Halifax County or the Halifax Regional Municipality. The only farming is actually in that particular district of Halifax County. Now, my colleague from the Eastern Shore, who used to represent my part of Halifax Regional Municipality for a short period of time, used to say the same thing. So, although I haven't spoke to him recently about the Eastern Shore, while they may not have a lot of farm animals, they certainly would have a lot of domestic animals. And hence I want to make that distinction that the Department of Agriculture will take over the responsibility for farm animals and the SPCA the domestic animals. And that's a big significant change supported by our stakeholders. So we're pleased that we've canvassed the stakeholders necessary. And again, the Federation of Agriculture is particularly pleased with that move. Now, the Nova Scotia Veterinarian Medical Association are supportive of the new act. These professionals have expressed their appreciation for our efforts to protect animals throughout Nova Scotia, and that would be animals of all size, shape, and description and name. And we have met with the SPCA on a number of occasions, and we continue and will continue to promote a climate of openness, transparency, and accountability that will allow them to carry out their mandate. Again, we want to commend the volunteers at the SPCA who rely so much on donations and goodwill. We have every confidence in the ability of the SPCA to perform its mandate in making sure domestic animals are safe and that domestic animals are protected. The SPCA, the Nova Scotia Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, became incorporated. Get this, Mr. Speaker. I bet you can't guess when the SPCA was incorporated, Mr. Speaker, but they were incorporated in 1877. It's the oldest existing society in Nova Scotia. Now, Mr. Speaker, the new legislation will allow the SPCA to focus on the safety of domestic animals, Mr. Speaker, which is their area of expertise. Now, Mr. Speaker, the situation with the whole new act and the title, it is related, Mr. Speaker. If you wanted to, I can break it down to the various sections. I won't speak to clauses because I understand we're not permitted to do that in second reading. But there, in the piece of legislation, Bill 186, the new Animal Protection Act, there are a number of changes. And Mr. Speaker, we did speak earlier about the standards and qualifications for SPCA inspectors, their chief inspector, and as well we talked about the responsibilities that those inspectors, thank you, we have made some changes, and you'll find those changes in section 12, Mr. Speaker. Now, again, the inspectors must be recommended to the minister, who recommends to the Minister of Justice that they become special constables under the Justice Act. And Mr. Speaker, we are taking this legislation very, very seriously. We as well have pointed out that there will be an administrative position. There will be two administrative positions, one at the SPCA level and one at the Department of Agriculture level to administer these programs. So, Mr. Speaker, we are providing accountability for the SPCA through the annual reports to the Minister on inspections undertaken. And, Mr. Speaker, we believe that with the changes, there will be a better capacity to provide for the animals, both domestic and farm, in the province of Nova Scotia. And that's our goal, Mr. Speaker. And we are we have spoke rather with the veterinarians, and we're asking them to report suspected cruelty cases, Mr. Speaker. So the bill in itself, as it was introduced during the last session, is a very comprehensive piece of legislation, and we're asking that the members opposite support the legislation. The Minister of Agriculture and the department staff people are very, very interested in the comments that members opposite may have relative to the legislation. And I think that although I guess I can take just a little peek here, Mr. Speaker. It's just regarding the bill. I remember the agriculture critic, who has a lot of for the NDP. He brought forward a concern that he had, and I don't know if he was being facetious or just what he was up to, but we kind of had a chuckle about it because the point he raised was that in the descriptions of farm animals, Mr. Speaker, we include cattle, horses, sheep, swine, poultry, game farm animals including wild boars, bison, buffalo, llamas, and Mr. Speaker, foxes, chinchilla, and mink raised for fur production, rabbits raised for meat production, and any animal designated as a farm animal in the regulations. But I think the honourable member opposite wondered if we had in fact included the honeybee, I think it was. Yes, he's nodding in an affirmative way there, Mr. Speaker. So I did go back to the department, and Mr. Speaker, we brought that concern forward, and I have to tell you that although the honourable member opposite and I, the member for Hants East, and I had a chuckle over that, we also had a chuckle at the department level too. So if the member is serious, he can bring that once again forward to the floor. But you know, I wonder though where you would draw the line. Like, you know, I'm sure the member has I guess an activity that he uses if a mosquito should bug him, and I'm wondering if he would want me to, or the government, to look at including mosquito. Now, I don't want to get too far out in left field. I don't want to get out in left field at all, but Mr. Speaker, I do want to point out that as far as bees go, yes, there are keepers of bees. Bees are a very, very important industry in the province of Nova Scotia. You know, Mr. Speaker, just during the last session in the spring, we brought forward amendments to the Beekeeping Act, the Bee Industry Act, and Mr. Speaker, as a consequence of doing that, we can now, as a minister, delegate different individuals, maybe the deputy, to licensed beekeepers and things of that nature. Oh, drawing a long bow, Mr. Speaker. I see what you're saying there, but let's go then. Perhaps, Mr. Speaker, being the representative, clear you would identify with the mink industry. And the mink industry is a very, very significant industry. It's quite profitable, actually. The mink producers in the province of Nova Scotia, they go about their business, they keep their heads down, Mr. Speaker, and they do a lot for their communities. They bring new dollars into the province of Nova Scotia. And you know, it's not just as simple. It's not, those creatures are a fairly vicious little animal. And Mr. Speaker, we've had the opportunity to travel the province considerably, and do you know, I believe it's in the community of Weymouth, there's a company, I think it's Sabians, I apologize if I'm pronouncing the name incorrectly, but I think they employ 18 to 21 employees making cages for the mink. And they bring in wood, I believe, from outside of Nova Scotia, not because they don't want to use Nova Scotia wood, but there is a wood in another jurisdiction that actually withstands the mink, you know, I suppose their claws and their teeth and whatever happens to be gnawing away at the wood. And I know Mr. Muse in the gallery knows a lot about the mink industry. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure if I can attend or not, but I do know that in the community of Clare, there's a I'm not sure if it's in the annual general meeting of the mink breeders or just what's taking place, but I have had the privilege a couple of years ago to go to, and that's a great meeting. Like, you have a reception, and then you have a meal, and I think some of the fur buyers are in attendance. And you know, they bring a lot of new money to the province of Nova Scotia. It's just great for the Nova Scotia economy. But you know, the mink will, in fact, become the responsibility, if in fact there are issues with the care and the welfare of mink, whether it's food or whether it's water or whether it's lodging, that will become the responsibility of the Department of Agriculture. And well, it should, Mr. Speaker, and well, it should. And I can't myself think of any cases. In fact, I commend the mink industry, but you know, do you know even in the Musquodoboit Valley there is a mink breeder in the Musquodoboit Valley? Yeah, there's one that I'm aware of, and Mr. Speaker, he's doing quite well, I understand, and maybe it's something that we would encourage. We should perhaps encourage farmers that are in a vocation that perhaps isn't as sustainable as the mink industry. But I know I shouldn't go there as this here is second reading of the Animal Protection Act. But Mr. Speaker, I don't know. I know that minks are raised in your constituency, but I haven't really noticed during my travels as to whether or not rabbits are raised for, or if there's a production in the Clare riding. And but I do know that finfish are raised in an aquaculture site for commercial purposes. And my good colleague, the Minister for Fisheries, the Minister of Fisheries, who's responsible for aquaculture, is very supportive of the finfish. And Mr. Speaker, this is, Mr. Speaker, finfish raised in the aquaculture site for commercial purposes do fall under the farm animal category. So it's very relevant, Mr. Speaker, that we bring forward these substantive changes. So, you know, and I'm very pleased to have the support of the very popular MLA for Guysborough. He's worked with me on many occasions, Mr. Speaker. And yes, I'll get back, Mr. Speaker. So anyway, we spoke about the former act. We spoke about peace officers. And let's talk about premises, Mr. Speaker, in the definition. You know, animals are kept in all kinds of accommodation. Well, if they're a domestic animal, I can only speak for myself, but I would think probably you would agree that most folks keep their dogs and cats in their homes with them. Now, some may not, but that's another thing that has to be considered when allegations are made of abuse is actually where are these animals residing, and are they in the appropriate lodging. So premises including any place, building, vehicle, vessel, receptacle, or thing, Mr. Speaker. That refers to premises, and I thought that was important to point that out. Now, there will be, rather, Mr. Speaker, opportunity when this bill comes back to the House in Committee of the Whole House to further fine-tune it or go through it chapter and verse. But, Mr. Speaker, I felt it important here this afternoon to rise and move Bill 186 for second reading, the Animal Protection Act, and I'm pleased to do so. And I thank you, Mr. Speaker, for your presiding over it. Thank you.
Thank you, the Chair. The Chair now recognizes the honourable member for Hansard.
Thank you. Smattering of applause. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to say after a while listening to the Minister of Agriculture speak on Bill 186, it makes me think that there's a need for another bill for the prevention of cruelty to members. And but I wasn't sure if the minister's plan was to filibuster his own bill, but I want to say that certainly I think by and large the members here of the New Democratic Party caucus are in support of the minister in the direction he wants this legislation to go. I have to say that there's a couple of issues, and I'll expect that as this bill moves through the House that the minister and I will chat regarding those. But I do see it as an important step to have some separation of the farm animal livestock sector away from the SPCA, and I think to have them to look after care regarding, the minister would say domestic animals. To me, farm animals are domestic as well, but certainly I think if we want to say companion animals, then it might be a better terminology. And I was actually not joking when I mentioned to the minister about bees. I see them as part of the agricultural sector. I certainly couldn't say that I know enough about bees neurologically to know when they're in pain or distress or whatever. I think probably the clearest evidence would be whether they're starving in the winter when beekeepers have to add sugar to, to ensure that they have enough energy to survive. But other than that, I know that the minister's bill actually says non-human vertebrates, so that would not qualify bees, Mr. Speaker, but so be it. The Act, I guess at this stage of the game, and maybe the minister could nod, but I'd be interested to know whether the regulations are written for this piece of legislation. So that is a little worrisome. I really would have liked to have had a chance to see those by this stage, since the minister introduced the bill in the spring, and to think that the regulations haven't been written. I'm curious, because I didn't see it in the Act, but I'm thinking that the provincial inspector is a veterinarian, and it would seem to me that of paramount importance in this legislation, and since we're talking about animal health issues, that the provincial inspector, and if not the chief inspector, but someone the chief inspector should go to, would be a veterinarian. But it seems to me we're talking animal health issues. We should have animal health professionals as the people who are inspecting livestock or pets or whatever. But if we're going to be concerned about animal health issues, they should be animal health professionals. And I guess that's something I would have liked to have seen in the the regulations. The chief inspector must meet the minimum qualifications prescribed in the regulations. So without knowing what those are, it's difficult to know. But I'm willing to see this bill go forward, and I think the parts of the bill that actually address issues of transparency around the SPCA, the annual general meeting being open to the public, that's a criticism we had heard in the past, and so I think the minister is right on in seeing that is in the legislation. The minister made a comment, vets must report suspected neglect to the chief inspector. So it would seem to me that if the chief inspector isn't a veterinarian and vets are going to report neglect to the chief inspector is going to have to go to a veterinarian, or should be going to a veterinarian, to find out about the neglect. So it seems kind of odd, that the vets will be going to somebody who's not a veterinarian, to have that person go back to a veterinarian to analyze a situation to determine whether there has been neglect. The minister is right. I do keep some livestock. Yes, a registered flock of Suffolk sheep, and some Canadian horses. Yes, Canada's national breed. So, and I do keep a waterfowl as well. I want to tell the minister, when he was referring to his neighbor taking the farrier course, I've done that as well. I do my own shoeing and hoof trimming, and have been quite lucky to be able to do that without any serious injury to me. So, so Mr. Speaker, we see this as a good step forward in legislation. I think that the minister was probably well advised to go down this road, and I think that what people, I'd like them to recognize in terms of farm animals in particular, is that farmers try to make use of animals and the idea of making a living and to make money. And it's not in their best interest at all to have animals that are in poor health or neglected. And so in order for a healthy industry, that requires healthy, well-kept livestock. And I think that the agricultural sector, as the minister has indicated, would be supportive of this legislation. And so with those few comments, and I hope the minister will take a hint from that, my caucus colleagues are supportive of this legislation to this point, and would like to see it move further through the House. And I'll raise any other issues with the minister as time goes on. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you very much. We're kind of hemmed in here today. I need a little bit of space, so here we go. Thank you. I'm pleased today to speak on Bill 186, and I do have some comments, and also my colleague, the member for Halifax Clayton Park, will also have a few comments as well on this bill. This bill came out of a climate where both on the farm and also with pets across Nova Scotia, there were a few alarming incidents. So it came out of I think, a disturbing time and a disturbing climate for the welfare of animals. The fact that the bill has come forward is very positive. I'm sure as it goes to law amendments, and we hear from experts in the field, as well as those who have a genuine interest in a quality of life issue. And so I'm sure we'll hear from a number of people when it does go to law amendments. And I would encourage Nova Scotians from across the province who have an interest in both farm and their pets to come forward, and perhaps there can be some strengthening of this bill. But there's no question that the time had come to replace the Animal Cruelty Prevention Act, and this bill, which was introduced last spring, now can be developed perhaps a little bit further. But our party supports the direction and the intent of this bill. I think the fact that the Department of Agriculture is going to put in place a structure that will allow for the caring of farm animals and not have to rely on the volunteer SPCA organization is a real positive step. In Indianapolis Valley, we had a very, very disturbing situation in terms of farm animal welfare, and again, it almost exceeded the ability and the expertise and just the manpower to be able to observe and take quick, responsive action. So I think this is a very, very good step, and the SPCA will concentrate on domestic animals, which we know that probably somewhere in the range, I'm told, of about 75% of Nova Scotians have a domestic animal, so a pet, and so which means that it is a very, very significant area. So Bill number 186 will definitely be a step forward in perhaps having stronger legislation and therefore stronger animal care as a result of some of the changes. The fact that the Department of Agriculture and the SPCA will each have a head inspector to oversee the regional inspectors across the province, I think splitting up some of that responsibility because we know that there are really hundreds of thousands of farm animals. When we look at the raising of chickens and turkeys, not as many hogs these days. I read a report on how few hogs there are currently compared to just 3 years ago. But the number of these animals being raised, in fact, is a concern. The transport of animals, as the minister knows, also has become a big concern. And again, that we do have the best care in shipping of animals interprovincially, or sometimes as well into the United States. This is an area that now the Department of Agriculture, I think, can have greater control over through its inspectors. And the fact that these inspectors, the head inspectors obviously, but also other inspectors across the province, have to meet a set of qualifications, a set of standards, and there will be criteria in place for them to carry out their work, again, is, I think, one of the real strengths of this particular bill. The minister and the critic opposite for the NDP talked about the role of the SPCA. And, you know, the SPCA, over 100 years old, a venerable organization, a volunteer organization, again, has a tremendous history. But we all know that, again, in the last couple of years, there have been some disturbing incidents where the SPCA did not seem to be able to respond in a manner that Nova Scotians had an expectation that would in fact occur. In the area of the Annapolis Valley where I live, the SPCA has been going through a very difficult time. We actually have no SPCA shelter currently, and a number of other organizations have come in to try and support the need for strong animal welfare in our area. It is hoped that the new shelter will indeed get open with a combination of paid staff and volunteers, so that again the tradition of the SPCA, being a highly regarded institution in our Valley community, can be reestablished. At the same time, you know, the veterinary work by Dr. Bly in Wolfville has been recognized in that part of Kings County as being exceptional. Safe Haven, another new location run by Melissa Lee in Berwick, has gained a good reputation. Hart in the Aylesford area with Laurie Wheeler has again started to be recognized as doing quality and capable work, as well as one of the people that started out in Annapolis County but is now in the Greenwood-Kingston area, Jill Brodeur, who has run a very, very successful neuter and release program, and again, it's another kind of wave of thinking about how we can best control some of the wild animals, some of the animals, the feral cats and so forth, that are a serious problem, a significant problem in some areas of Nova Scotia. So the SPCA, perhaps again through this piece of legislation, with head inspectors, will in fact be able to look at what's happening regionally, and also what kind of perhaps new programs and extensions of the work of the SPCA that can enhance animal welfare. The fact that they have to do an annual report, this is new, and that will come before the legislature at some point during the year, again, is another positive development that relates to this piece of legislation. The fact, however, that the SPCA remains very much an autonomous group and respects its long tradition and its influence in the province. However, the fact that the minister is able to revoke the SPCA's ability to enforce the Act and designate another entity to fulfill that role if the SPCA fails to perform the duties set out in the legislation, which we know other organizations are currently at work in the province, and also that they are able to come in and play a rightful role under this legislation. So I think this is a positive step. One of the areas that we know has become a huge concern in the province is the SPCA being more open, more transparent, having annual meetings that the public can come to and express their concerns, as well as complement the work of the SPCA when it's carried out at the best level. So I'm looking forward to hearing from the public in Nova Scotia on this piece of legislation, and so with that, I will take my place and look forward to it going to law amendments.
Diana?
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the honourable member from Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to have a few minutes here to speak on Bill 186, an act to protect animals and to aid animals that are in distress. Certainly, I guess like all of us here in the House, we probably have a soft spot for animals and certainly want to see them all treated properly and with respect, and not to see them in distress or to be treated cruelly in any way. But I guess having grown up on a family farm in Pictou County, I'm certainly aware of farm animals, and I know horses and chickens and pigs and cows and sheep and various other assortment of menagerie of animals was quite common on various mixed farms throughout the province. And of course today we're much more specialized, but still lots of animals, but usually on one species on most farms at this time. And like many members of this House, I'm a pet owner. I certainly have a cat and or two cats and a dog at home, and we all love our animals. So it's important that they be treated with the proper respect and looked after. Of course, this bill, Mr. Speaker, has come out of probably some of the high-profile cases of animal abuse or animal cruelty that have occurred around the province over the last year or two. Certainly. Dog abuse that was known in Cape Breton, and certainly cattle problems that were in other parts of the province. So there's a need for this bill. It's timely, and it's good to see that it's coming forward. I guess it was introduced here in the House last spring, but here it is now open for debate here on the first day of the fall sitting of this legislature. And certainly anything that's going to bring some transparency to the whole inspection system to protect our animals, whether farm animals or domestic animals, is vital, and add some credibility to the inspection system, I think, is critical at this time. Now, last year, or last spring, I guess it was, I did bring to the attention of the minister a group in Pictou County that put a report together and actually delivered the report to the minister's office, and I know perhaps it was helpful to him or his department personnel in drawing up this particular bill. But it was a thorough and detailed report that made some suggestions on how to protect our livestock and domestic animals or pets. And I'm sure that was perhaps looked at and perhaps taken into consideration by the minister and his staff. And EarthArk is I guess an animal rescue group in 4 Mile Brook in Pictou County, that some very dedicated and volunteers, people such as Betty Snyder and Wendy Grant and her husband, and I know a whole lot of other people there that come out to volunteer. And there's approximately 40 horses kept there on the farm at Earth Ark at all times, a number of waterfowl and other animals as well. But it's a great spot for young people to come and to volunteer and to get involved with animals. And for some people, it's almost like a life-changing experience. They get that first-hand knowledge of farm animals, and they get a chance to learn some responsibilities. So there's a number of young people and not so young people that are involved with that very worthwhile organization. And one of the suggestions, Mr. Speaker, that they had made in their report to the minister was that they, I guess after many decades of experience, have a lot of expertise, they have a lot of knowledge, especially on horses, but also on other farm animals. And it was felt that if from time to time, if the department, I guess it's in the bill as being under the authority of the chief inspector, that if officers were needed, or like a peace officer or a special constable that would be needed to investigate a case of abuse, then it would be worthwhile perhaps to call on people like them that have a lot of expertise, that can go out into the community and and investigate a situation. So I would hope, Mr. Speaker, I see it's in the bill in section 12, the chief inspector has the power to recommend persons to the society for appointment as inspectors of the society, and would be under the authority of the chief inspector. And I would hope that the chief inspector perhaps would consider recognized groups that have a lot of expertise, such as Earth Ark, the Earth Animal Rescue Center in Pictou County, because they have certain qualifications, they have certain criteria, and I guess that would be at the discretion of the chief inspector. So basically, Mr. Speaker, that's really all I want to say on this bill. But I think it's a positive step. It seems to be good legislation, and certainly, as my colleague from Hants East indicated, that we would be prepared to help move it forward, and I certainly would be pleased to hear from others on the topic as well. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to conclude my report, my remarks, and I guess at this point in time, perhaps I would like to move that we adjourn debate on this particular bill at this time.
Thank you. The motion before the House is to adjourn the debate on Bill number 186. Is it agreed? Agreed. It is agreed. The chair now recognizes the Honourable Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. That concludes the government business for today. I move that the House do now rise, given the other business to be considered, and meet tomorrow, again at the hour from 9 a.m. to 12 noon. At that time, following the daily routine, government business will include public bills for second reading, any continued debate on 186, but 179, 187, 88, 89, 90, and 91.
Thank you. The motion for adjournment has been made. Is it agreed? The motion is carried. The House will rise to sit again tomorrow at 9 a.m. We have arrived at the moment of interruption. A motion was made earlier by the Leader of the Liberal Party for an emergency debate to take place at the moment of interruption and was approved. The urgent debate for this evening, it is imperative that we immediately set aside time to discuss and debate the best way for our province to shield itself from the global economic downturn, and furthermore, discuss how we are going to position our province to grow on a sustainable path towards the future. The chair recognizes the Honourable, the Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to first of all thank all members of the House for agreeing to have this debate tonight on what is an urgent issue for the people of Nova Scotia and Canada, Mr. Speaker. And I want to especially acknowledge the member for Cape Centre who gave up his late debate. Mr. Speaker, we have been, as was talked about today earlier in question period and was asked of this government, was to lay out an updated financial forecast, and was referenced by the Premier today that That traditionally happens in December, and while we're all well aware of that, the circumstances that are in front of us as a province deserve that we begin to do business not as usual, but differently, Mr. Speaker. Nova Scotians are looking at us and wanting us to get this right. When you look at the fact of what's taken place over our history, when you look at in 1978, Mr. Speaker, when a Liberal government who was managing the economy of Nova Scotia brought in consecutive balanced budgets and turned it over to a Conservative government who ran in for a decade and a half of unbalanced budgets, of running and spending, quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, revenue that this Premier should have the right to spend on behalf of the people of Nova Scotia. But instead, we are spending that by servicing the debt that was run up over that period of time. In 1993, Mr. Speaker, a federal government led by Jean Chrétien inherited a $12 billion deficit from a Conservative government of Brian Mulroney, and left this country with a $12 billion surplus, Mr. Speaker. And today, because of unfocused attention to the economy, because of unfocused public policy, we are at the federal level at a position where we could be running a deficit budget. Well, Mr. Speaker, I want to speak on behalf of our caucus, and I want to speak to the Premier, to his government. It is completely unacceptable for us to even consider looking at a deficit budget in the province of Nova Scotia. And I want to be on record as saying, I heard the Premier say that earlier today and earlier in the week, and I fully support that position, that we can no longer pass on the decisions that we have to make to our children. Mr. Speaker, governments have done that before. Governments have been unwilling to make tough decisions. Well, I say to every member of this House, if you're unwilling to make tough decisions, do not apply for a job in government. But we also have a collective responsibility to try to provide a good path forward as we move towards this spring, Mr. Speaker. And I think it's time that we set aside some partisan politics. And I want to make an invitation to the Premier that I am prepared on behalf of our caucus to sit down with his government, and I hope that the leader of the New Democratic Party to collectively put together a plan that would move our province forward as we move into what are going to be very difficult economic times for our province, Mr. Speaker. I think because we've made short-sighted policy decisions, we are put in the situation today where we're going to have to make tough ones. If we had debated HRM by design in the spring, Mr. Speaker, we would not be today worrying about whether or not a project is going to be developed. We'd begin to hear developers talking about developing a project. We need to begin to allow that to happen. That bill needs to come before this House and be debated so that the private sector can invest their money in their properties to begin to develop the city and our province. Those jobs that were talked about, the contractor in Yarmouth, the electrician in Yarmouth who wants to stay in Nova Scotia should have the right to stay in Nova Scotia. But the reason they're not in Nova Scotia today is because we failed to look ahead. We failed to deal with that piece of legislation in the spring, and today we are faced with having that situation where the Premier is interfering in a level of government that he shouldn't be. Instead, he should be focused on the issues that's in front of us, and that's making sure that we have an active economy here in Halifax. Albeit through these very successful times in our country, when you look at the growth that has happened from '93 until a Liberal government turned it over to the Conservative government, Mr. Speaker, we as an economy had the lowest growing economy in Nova Scotia. The lowest growing economy in the country. And that is because we were unwilling to think ahead. And I've laid out a plan to this government and to Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker, on the issue of energy security. I was proud that our government brought in a bill around a small business advocate that made sure that small businesses had a voice at every power rate hearing from here on in, making sure that the people that we say are the backbone of our economy, we all say it, we all say are the backbone of our economy, and we give them lip service, Mr. Speaker. We stood up and said we wanted to make sure that they had a voice at power rate hearings, and today they have that voice. And I want to thank and congratulate my caucus colleagues and the other members of this House who joined us to make sure that was happening. Last spring, while there were some very difficult choices to make, Mr. Speaker, one that wasn't was that we stood beside those Nova Scotians who needed our help and made sure that there was a Keep the Heat program in place. We made sure that was there so that those Nova Scotians wouldn't be left behind, and it was that kind of forward thinking that anticipated
what those families would be facing this coming fall and winter. That same kind of forward thinking, Mr. Speaker, has to apply to energy security in this province. We can no longer look at it as solely an issue for Nova Scotians to deal with. We need to begin to engage Atlantic Canadians and Atlantic governments on the issue of energy security to make sure not only that our energy is secure, but that we have a stable energy pricing so that businesses know what the economic environment is that they're working in. We can no longer be held hostage by volatile oil prices or coal. We need to stand up and ask and demand to our Atlantic Canadian partners that we want to be your partner. The province of Nova Scotia is prepared to make sure that we are not held hostage by foreign oil and coal. Mr. Speaker, it is to all of our advantages. The only thing missing in this piece is looking forward. We haven't been, and there hasn't been the political leadership to show from Nova Scotia that we need to make sure there's an energy corridor running through our province. Mr. Speaker, it is not only to our advantage, it is to the advantage of Newfoundland and Labrador and also to New Brunswick, Mr. Speaker, to make sure that they have access to provide the renewable energies to the people of their province and ours, making sure that we get full advantage of our natural assets here, making sure that our businesses are in a stable environment when it comes to energy prices, Mr. Speaker. And we will stand beside any premier or any party who decides to do that. We join and we welcome them to join our fight. We've asked the province of New Brunswick, we went and visited the province of New Brunswick and articulated the case for Nova Scotia, why it is important to have a solid energy core running through the province of Nova Scotia and why it benefits the people of New Brunswick. We will do the same thing in Newfoundland, Mr. Speaker, because it is important for the people of Newfoundland and Labrador as well as Nova Scotians to provide that solid energy core. Mr. Speaker, just imagine if we get the climate right, the private sector investment that will take place in our province to ensure that that energy corridor is here. Imagine the jobs that we're talking about being created in HRM today around the buildings that are going to be built. Imagine what would happen when we build that energy corridor through our province. The only thing missing, Mr. Speaker, is forward thinking. We need to begin to realize the long-term benefit to our province to begin an Atlantic Canada Union when it comes to energy security, Mr. Speaker. You know, there's been, as I started out by suggesting here, Mr. Speaker, it is time to set aside, and the Premier, I want to make this offer to the Premier again, that it is incumbent on all of us to try to find a solution as we move forward. And I want to extend an invitation to the Premier that I'm more than prepared to sit down with him, and our caucus is prepared to sit down with him and his government, and I hope the New Democratic Party is prepared to join us, to set aside party politics for the future of Nova Scotia so that we can deal with the economic crisis that is looming for our province. We can no longer let our political differences separate dealing with this crisis that's in front of us, Mr. Speaker. A political election, whenever it may happen, a general election in the province of Nova Scotia, we can all articulate our vision of where we want to take the province at that point. But it is incumbent on each of us that are in this house today that we sit together, that we try to find a common solution. Set aside the bickering, Mr. Speaker, so that we put our children's interests, the small business interests, ahead of our own political interests. Mr. Speaker, I also want to talk today, and I want to encourage, as we did in question period, this Premier and this government and the Minister of Finance to put together an economic forecast now. We need to have a solid idea of where this government is when it comes to meeting its financial commitments to the people of Nova Scotia. We need to know where their budgets are, Mr. Speaker, in order to make that plan. We can no longer say in December, as we did last year, we're running a tight surplus, and then in March go on a spending spree. Nova Scotians lose confidence in all of us when that happens, not just in this government, but all members who sit in this House. That's why I want to extend again to the Premier an invitation to allow us to cooperate, to put together a solid economic plan to move us forward, to deal with some difficult decisions that are going to be facing all of us as we come into the spring. Mr. Speaker, one of the things that our party has been fighting from day one, is the regulation around gas in the province of Nova Scotia. Well, in certain circumstances, Mr. Speaker, as we wish they had done south of the border, have regulated the banking industry a little better, In this province, it is clear that gas regulation is costing Nova Scotia consumers each and every time they fill up their car. And it is costing Nova Scotia businesses. It is putting us at a disadvantage. What's wrong with allowing our businesses to be competitive, Mr. Speaker? Before they get up in the morning, this government, under a failed policy supported by the Democratic Party, is putting them at a disadvantage. Gas regulation is costing them. They're already at an economic disadvantage. It is time to scrap this failed public policy. We will be on the verge of spending $500,000 for 3 independent reports that will all come back and tell us that this policy has not achieved what the government and the Democratic Party has told Nova Scotians it would. It has not stabilized gas prices, and it does not prevent the closure of rural gas stations, Mr. Speaker. What we need to do is allow our businesses and allow them to be competitive so that they can go out and do and work as we know they can and compete not only here but in Atlantic Canada. What are we afraid of? What are we afraid of? Do the people in this House not believe they can be competitive, the business can be competitive? I believe they can be. But give them an even playing field so that they can go out and compete in their chosen field, in their chosen profession, with people not only in Atlantic Canada, but across the world, Mr. Speaker. And it is this party who will continue to fight so that we scrap that failed public policy, which is putting our economy at a disadvantage, Mr. Speaker. I also want, and I hope that the Premier, when his remarks, is going to commit to us in this House today, that we will not be subject in the spring to a crazy spending spree on his part or on his government's part. Mr. Speaker, just imagine last spring that if we had that $300 million to deal with today, to be able to use, and we had invested that properly, we'd invested that wisely. If we had gone out and cut the small business tax, we had gone out and looked at the small business environment in this province and said to them, we believe in you. Not only are we going to say that you're the backbone of our economy, we're going to put money behind the words. We're going to stand beside you and make sure that you're competitive. When you look at the fact that we are one of the highest tax jurisdictions in almost every assessment, Mr. Speaker, why would anyone come to this province and set up? It's not good enough anymore to say you come here because it's a great place to live. We all know that. Canadians know that. Young Nova Scotians know that as they're flying somewhere else to get a job and invest in the economies of other provinces. We need to create an environment. We need to create an environment where those young Nova Scotians see an opportunity to stay home, to create their own jobs, to build the communities that they want to be in, to build the communities that their families built, that their parents built, that their grandparents built. They want to be here. We need to create an economic environment that makes that happen. Mr. Speaker, we have talked about in this House about doubling the issue of tourism. There is not one economic lens that this government goes through when it comes to the issue of paving. Not one economic lens. When you think of the fact, and you look at the tourism icons in our province, whether it's the Cabot Trail, Peggy's Cove, whether it's Annapolis Royal, any part of this province, there is not an economic lens that this government goes through to do its paving. So instead, we invite people to come and drive over some of the worst roads in our country. Why? Because we decide that we haven't put together that economic outlook on how we're going to build our province. And Mr. Speaker, I want to close by saying one more time, on behalf of our caucus, on behalf of Nova Scotians, I want to reach out to this government, I want to reach out to the Democratic Party to say let's find common ground to build an economic future for this province, setting aside our political differences. We can no longer wait till tomorrow. The time to act is now, and I wait for the phone call.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes the Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'll be sharing some of my time with the Deputy Premier, Minister of Economic Development. And it certainly is a very timely debate that we're having here tonight. And I want to thank my colleague for taking it forward. And it's certainly one that I know everyone in this House certainly shares interest in. Mr. Speaker, the last number of months in Nova Scotia, across this country and certainly globally, have been unusual times and very interesting times indeed. It's also a time that the government has been planning for. And the government has been planning for this time for a number of years. It's the very reason why when we came in 1999, under my predecessor, we began the process of dealing with deficits. In the 1990s and well before, under governments, both political stripes, we saw deficit after deficit. And when we came in 1999, I believe it was upwards of $700 million we faced in a deficit situation left by the then Liberal government. And, Mr. Speaker, the one thing that all Nova Scotians can agree upon today is that that's not a situation we want to see our province move forward into ever again. Mr. Speaker, we have worked hard to make sure that we took our province back to where it should be. And that's a province with balanced budgets. And, Mr. Speaker, it's not just about a balanced budget on paper. It's what a balanced budget means. And, Mr. Speaker, those on this side of the House truly believe that a balanced budget means opportunity. It means opportunity to invest in our education system, in our healthcare system, to help those who need help in community services, and, Mr. Speaker, to move this province forward. It's why we focus not only on providing balanced budgets, Mr. Speaker, but taking a look at other issues, such as our debt management plan, taking a look at issues such as our debt to GDP, Mr. Speaker, and by focusing on those issues as well as our foreign exposure and focusing on other issues, Mr. Speaker, with respect to good financial management, we have seen our debt to GDP go down from 49% to 37%. And that means our ability, Mr. Speaker, to pay for the things and the investments that we want to see going forward is greater than it was just a few short years ago. That's what this is all about, Mr. Speaker. It's about making a difference for the people of our communities. Mr. Speaker, one of the quotes from the bond rating agencies. Now, we all wear our political hats, and obviously we have our political differences. But when we have an independent look at what is happening in Nova Scotia, what do we hear from one of the bond rating agencies, Mr. Speaker? And I'll quote, "It's prudent and forward-looking approach," and this is why, Mr. Speaker, they gave us a better rating in consecutive years. And I quote, "It's prudent and forward-looking approach to fiscal management and a much improved debt structure." They recognize, Mr. Speaker, and that is not just taking a look at where we are today. That is taking a look at where we are taking the province, Mr. Speaker, and that's an independent look. Mr. Speaker, the one thing we can't do, and I spoke to the Halifax Chamber of Commerce this week, as well as the Canadian Federation of Independent Business last week, and I'll be meeting with the Nova Scotia Chamber soon. And it's the first among many meetings we'll be having with business groups and others. The one thing that they agreed upon, the one thing we can't do as a province, or nor should we do as businesses or politicians, is panic. But we must be confident in our ability, and I am confident in our ability, to deal with the situation at hand. What we have seen in the last few weeks is a meeting of the Council of the Federation to talk about this issue, to meet with economists, and to speak amongst provinces to find out what is happening in each jurisdiction. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, when you take a look at what's happening in places like Ontario and other provinces, Nova Scotia is very well positioned. They are going to be facing some very challenging times, and different times than perhaps we will be, although we're not adverse to what's happening out in the world markets. But, Mr. Speaker, because of the work we've done through balancing the books, through good fiscal management, and by investing in the economy, we today in Nova Scotia are well positioned to face these challenges. 10,500 new jobs created in Nova Scotia during the past year, Mr. Speaker. More people, 457,000 people employed in Nova Scotia, among the highest on record in our province, Mr. Speaker. Year over year, unemployment rates went down, labour force increased. That does not happen by accident. Every dollar that the Ministry of Economic Development has moved forward through the Industrial Expansion Fund has returned about $1.89 back to our province. Mr. Speaker, that's a sign of good investments. That's a sign that companies are genuinely interested in coming here to our province and setting up shop and expanding. That's why Michelin Tire's here. That's why financial service companies are coming here, whether it's Marsh, Butterfield, Citco, Olympia, and many, many others. And when we see circumstances such as the development piece in downtown Halifax not moving forward, it sends the wrong signal. It sends a wrong signal to developers, it sends a wrong signal to those companies because they want to be here. And Mr. Speaker, in fact, the Minister of Economic Development spent the past week on encouraging more of these companies to come here, and I believe they will, Mr. Speaker. It's also why we continue to invest in our education system. The only province in the country where tuition went down, Mr. Speaker, is where? Nova Scotia. The only province in the country. That's an investment in our young people. Now, my colleague mentioned the fact about some of the investments we made in the spring. Well, in fact, one of the investments we made in the spring was the MOU with our universities, which enabled tuition to go down this year, not up, Mr. Speaker. So if I heeded his advice, Mr. Speaker, we wouldn't see the success and some of the investment we're seeing in our universities. That would make us not more competitive, it would make us less competitive. Many of our companies are coming here because of what's happening in our education system, and we need to continue to invest. Mr. Speaker, we have had our Council of the Federation meeting. We have a finance ministers meeting this coming Monday, and we will be interested to hear more information gathered from that meeting. I'm quite interested to hear what the Federal Minister of Finance has to say and to get more clarification on some of the comments made in recent days. And upon that meeting, Mr. Speaker, we will be outlining some more of the action items that we have moving forward. But in anticipation of that meeting, we felt that the most responsible approach, the most appropriate approach, was to wait until that meeting took place. And upon completion of that meeting, we'll be able to move forward with respect to outlining some of the action items that we are taking, some of which we have already started, including the meetings as I have already indicated. In addition, Mr. Speaker, the First Minister's meeting will come up November the 10th, and we will be dealing appropriately with the meeting at that time. But I want to leave my colleagues with this. There's no doubt that this government is committed to balanced budgets, and we will not veer off that path. And that may mean Mr. Speaker, that may mean some tough choices. That may mean some challenging choices to make for us. But, Mr. Speaker, I've been there before when we made those tough choices. And I'm not going to veer off the path when I hear the opposition say, you know, you have to spend $20 million on this and $30 million on this and $50 million on that if it means going into a deficit position, Mr. Speaker, because I heard the NDP talking today. They were suggesting to move forward on something which, Mr. Speaker, would put us in a deficit today, Mr. Speaker, if we followed their advice. In question period alone today, I'm sure they spent well over $30 million, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, we can't go down that path, Mr. Speaker. If we listen to the opposition, Mr. Speaker, the NDP, we would be in a deficit today. That's not the way I'm going to leave this province for my son, and I don't think it's the way we should leave it for the sons and daughters of Nova Scotia. Hear, hear.
The Honourable the Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very pleased to be able to follow the Premier because he has articulated very well the accomplishments of this government with respect to how we have positioned ourselves to be able to respond to challenging economic times. And I think it's also appropriate to speak about Nova Scotia's position relative to all of the challenges that are out there. We are part of a country, and the Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party made reference to the contributions of the former Prime Minister Paul Martin and the balanced budgets that he brought forward. Those balanced budgets, although most of them were achieved on the backs of the provinces, and that party suffered from that when they were in government. But nevertheless, they did put us in the position of having balanced budgets. And we in this country also have a banking system that is extremely well regulated, Mr. Speaker, so much so that the IMF have rated the Canadian banking system as the best in the world. So that's in the national context where we find ourselves. We're still in the position of balanced budgets in this country. We have a very strongly regulated banking system. We have a strong banking system, and it is being able to withstand the challenges. There are no public bailouts of the banking system in this country. They're not necessary. So as a province, we find ourselves in a country within that context. And I think it's very important for Nova Scotians to understand that, Mr. Speaker, because it does provide us, we're not totally removed from the challenges, but it does provide us with a level of insulation with respect to the challenges that are out there that will enable us to do what the Premier has referenced, to sit down with other finance ministers throughout the country, to sit down with the First Ministers, and to look at the challenges that face the country and be able to move forward and articulate a position relative to that. So I want to make that point, Mr. Speaker, because I think it's very important that Nova Scotians understand the context in which we are facing this challenge. We're within a country in a much better position than most countries in the world. The Premier has done a very good job of articulating where we as a province find ourselves. We find ourselves having delivered 7 balanced budgets. That, Mr. Speaker, has enabled us to be able to address fundamental concerns of Nova Scotians. It means that we have been able to provide the funding we need for health care, for community services, funding for economic development. And, Mr. Speaker, when we look at what we have accomplished in economic development over the past number of years, we can look to the fact that through the Industrial Expansion Fund, we created 11,000 jobs, Mr. Speaker, where the Premier indicated a rate of return of 1.8 on that investment. If we look at NSBI, in the same time frame, they created 11,500 jobs, Mr. Speaker. That's 22,500 jobs through that initiative within our economic development policies. We have also, in the last year, Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotia has added 10,500 jobs in this province, according to Statistics Canada. Our employment rate is second only to the province of Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker, in terms of the gains that we have made relative to job creation. That, Mr. Speaker, is an extremely good record, and I would, how much time do I have, Mr. Speaker? 1 minute. I would also point out to honourable members that that government is a very good, solid, conservative government in Saskatchewan. So, Mr. Speaker, here are the 2 leading provinces in this country. Mr. Speaker, I realize my time is running out, but I want to remind Nova Scotians that we are well positioned both as a country and as a province to meet the challenges that are coming about as a result of the changing world economic circumstances. We're not isolated, Mr. Speaker, but we are well positioned to face the challenge, and we will face that challenge, and we'll do it successfully. Thank you.
The Honourable, the Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very pleased this evening to join the emergency debate on the economy. You know, Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians are exporters, we're traders. In fact, from the earliest days of our history, it has been trade and export that has driven our economy. The state of the world economy and the economic conditions of our major trading partners are therefore an immediate and pressing concern. One of our great economic advantages is that we are located next to the United States of America. Yet, look at the United States today. The U.S. economy is going through one of the most rapid contractions in a generation. And many people say that it may be the greatest economic challenge since the Great Depression. Just yesterday, new data showed that housing prices in the U.S. fell by 16.6% in August alone. The state of California has faced severe challenges with regular bridge financing that it requires just to operate. Yesterday, the governors of New York and New Jersey went to Washington to testify that their states urgently need federal help. And these are just some of the recent examples, Mr. Speaker. Now, no jurisdiction can insulate or isolate itself from a worldwide recession. However, we can act wisely to understand the forces that we face, and we can work together to ensure that Nova Scotians endure and emerge from this crisis in the best possible manner. I'm therefore pleased to hear the leader of the Liberal Party asked for cooperation in these matters, and I look forward to having the opportunity to meet with the Premier and with the leader of the third party in relation to things that we could achieve constructively with respect to the economy of this province. Forestry, the fishery, our major manufacturers are all affected very differently by currency fluctuations. The wild swings in the dollar create a very difficult climate for those keystone industries. Their income in Canadian dollars changed by 20% or more in a month, and by as much as 5% in a few days. The province needs to stay in close contact with our major firms and needs to be alert to the ways the province and the federal government can stabilize the situation, and most particularly be ready to identify any new opportunities that may open up, and, Mr. Speaker, work with industry to make the most of those opportunities. Specifically, Mr. Speaker, the government should consult directly with the Canadian manufacturers and exporters, the major forestry firms, the major fishery firms, the farm community, the Federation of Labour, and other significant economic players about how Nova Scotia's interests can best be represented and advanced at the First Minister's meeting on November 10th. The Premier should not attend this meeting simply as a representative of a minority party. He should literally or figuratively head a delegation that truly represents the best interests of our provincial economy. Now, Mr. Speaker, I've listened, as you did, to the Premier and to the Deputy Premier, Minister of Economic Development, and we've heard the submissions that they have made, but there are certain realities about the economy of this province. Nova Scotia's economy has performed over the past decade below the national average. Nova Scotia was tied for last with New Brunswick for the worst performing economy in Canada in 2007. Economists say that our employment increased by 1.2%, well below the national average of 1.8%. And add to this, Mr. Speaker, the fact that Nova Scotia leads the country in out-migration of workers aged 25 to 44, and no wonder, Mr. Speaker, that we're having this debate this evening. Mr. Speaker, our government, our collective government, is the largest spending government in the history of this province, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, they ran a surplus last year, and in the last few weeks of the year spent more than $300 million unbudgeted, unaccounted for by this legislature, Mr. Speaker. And what was the answer to this surplus? The answer to this surplus, Mr. Speaker, was for them to come in and raise taxes and affect the lives of ordinary Nova Scotians who are struggling through this same difficult economic time. Mr. Speaker, there's always been an affordable housing crunch in Nova Scotia, and if we do not safeguard the housing industry from a cycle of business failures and a price crash, those who need affordable housing will most certainly be the ones who are squeezed out. So our party recommends close liaison with the housing industry about the credit and market conditions they are facing and the prospects as they see them, so that we do not lose more than necessary by letting a cycle of boom and bust wipe out too many jobs and opportunities. In the immediate term, with businesses already closing and shrinking their office space in downtown Halifax, the province and major municipalities should consult with the development community about how much the demand for space is shrinking and the extent to which the difficult financial markets are now a barrier to needed new development. In general, Mr. Speaker, a bank, a credit union, an insurance company, or a pension fund wants to make as much money as possible. And if a developer shows that they can rent a planned office space, financing will be available. Many approved office projects for the downtown are not going ahead. The province should understand why and whether it can help keep the market healthy, recognizing that it is a private market driven by private for-profit decisions. The developers are competing with each other for any new tenants, and I expect they also want to ensure the healthiest possible situation for their industry and keep a skilled labor force in this province. Now, it may be too early to know whether major projects like the development of alternative sources of energy and sources of electricity, the shift toward public transportation, the development of the Lower Churchill, and of new transmission links to New Brunswick and New England are going to be seriously affected by the world economic situation. However, it is truer than ever that this province needs to move away from its reliance on imported fossil fuels. Now, Nova Scotia Power may not be the most popular corporation in the province, but it is among the most important. And the province must work closely with Nova Scotia Power on that goal of moving away from fossil fuels. The Department of Finance will have projections and forecasts of the likely effect on major revenues of the economic trends that are emerging. Those forecasts should be shared with Nova Scotians, and the government should show people enough respect to share its own priorities for spending decisions that may be required. In particular, I would suggest that it is more important than ever to make debt reduction a priority for extraordinary revenue, because debt payments still make up too much of our provincial budget. And balanced budgets, Mr. Speaker, balanced budgets and debt reduction are not a fashion statement in Nova Scotia. They are a necessity born from high debts created by spendthrift former governments and the massive downloading of federal responsibilities at the same time that federal operations were being shut down across Nova Scotia. In the longer term, the NDP has outlined goals for building a stronger Nova Scotia economy and for tackling the demographic challenges that our province faces. Nova Scotia lacks the skilled workers and tradespeople to meet industry demands. From forestry to high-tech, from precision machining to building contractors, companies say that they cannot find the people they need. Older workers often find it difficult to get retraining programs. Women and others living at home who have been out of the job market for years are not being engaged for training, which leads to the jobs that are already available. Meanwhile, other Nova Scotians lacking training and education are either unemployed or in low-paying and dead-end jobs. So here are some of the specific steps that the NDP has proposed. Keep our young people here by focusing on career and business opportunities in the 21st century industries, such as information and communication technologies, biotechnology and geomatics, energy production and efficiency. Step up the emphasis on learning, starting with early childhood education, a much greater emphasis on distance education and a cooperative education plan at the high school level as we work to make this a learning province. Support the industries that are already here, such as the 40,000 manufacturing jobs, most of them outside of HRM, if they want to expand and upgrade job opportunities. Foster an effective immigration program that won't alienate the young, capable entrepreneurs Nova Scotia so desperately needs. expand the Buy Local program to further assist our farm families and the communities in which they live, and work with the farm community on their goal of becoming marketers of top quality farm products. Provide affordable, accessible, and quality daycare, and provide access to primary health care to attract and keep young families. Support Sunrise Industries by recognizing how innovation is a great partner with Nova Scotians' excellent workforce and natural opportunities. Build clusters of manufacturing excellence that hold communities together in prosperity, and also apply that experience to the scientific and services sectors. Companies like RIM, whose location here is due in great measure to the careful work of John Ham and the team dedicated to that project, add to the quality and depth of business leadership in our province and make it possible to develop a cluster of business excellence. Hard-nosed business decisions will shape the Atlantic Gateway because the key decisions are going to be made by private sector investors and business people. A winning strategy must ensure that Nova Scotia is competitive in a competitive global business. Public investments must be strategic, effective, so that opportunities are not wasted. With that in mind, I propose the establishment of a Gateway Council where the key partners are represented and can develop a consensus based on economic realities and how to increase our imports and exports. There will be a renewal of world trade, and Nova Scotia should be ready with a strategy, not a wish list. The Gateway strategy that works is the one that makes sense to railroads, the shippers, the major customers of our ports, and that is the way we will get sustainable results. Mr. Speaker, these are challenging times, but I remain convinced that a constructive approach by the parties in this House will best meet the needs and hopes of today's families in Nova Scotia. There are causes for concern, Mr. Speaker, but as Franklin Roosevelt said so memorably, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. That's why I again urge the government to be open, accountable, and forward-looking in its approach to this economic crisis and to the opportunities for our province. Thank you for your time this evening.
The Honourable, the member for Cape Breton South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I'm going to talk for a few minutes about what I consider to be very important. Today is a very important day in our lives because it is a day of uncertainty, and it's been that way for quite some time now. So, but I also want to talk about the 15 minutes that I heard the government talk. That had to be the best 15 minutes of fiction that I've ever had the opportunity to hear, and I'm going to give you some facts that are going to bear out what I've said about the government's 15 minutes of fiction from the Premier and the Deputy Premier. I'm not going to talk too much about the official opposition's stand on the economy. They are untried and untested in Nova Scotia, and if we can help it, they'll never be tested. So, so I'm not going to dwell on that, because I shudder to think what would happen with the tax and spend policies of the NDP should they ever take government in this province. So, but having said that, I've caught the attention of the Leader of the Opposition anyway. But anyway, I'm going to relate some facts, and a lot of these facts that I'm going to talk about, Mr. Speaker, are facts that come from the government's own Department of Finance. They're not facts that we pulled out of a hat somewhere. They're facts that come from their own Department of Finance. Now, Mr. Speaker, over the past few months, as we all know, there's been a significant downturn in market activity throughout the entire world. And the TSX has dropped from 12,000 a month ago to 9,500 at the close of business yesterday. That's significant, and that's a problem. That's a concern that we all share. And the current market volatility has reached an all-time high. And the day-to-day uncertainty continues. Mr. Speaker, many people are concerned for their pensions, they're concerned for their savings, and they're being forced to decide whether they need to hold off retirement and maybe work just a few more years and wait to see if their retirement funds are going to improve. Now, the Statistics Canada reported since 1993, and this is a fact, Mr. Speaker, that's not fiction, it's a fact, that Nova Scotia has experienced the slowest growth out of any province in Canada. This slow growth occurred when Canada experienced relatively good economic times. And, Mr. Speaker, we have, in addition to that, Nova Scotia faces a situation where we have the storm clouds starting to come from Alberta regarding many of the people in our province that have gone out there for work. We just heard very recently that some of them are returning home because they're starting to lay off people out there in the tar sands. You know, now, we never thought that would happen, but that bubble is starting to burst. And where are these people going to find jobs when they come back to Nova Scotia? Has the government done any planning for that eventuality? I don't think so. You know, another fact is that we have heard about companies, which hasn't been mentioned. We've heard the rosy side of things, but we haven't heard about companies such as Clearwater, who have been forced to reconsider significant restructuring of financing because of the recent credit collapse and economic downturn. Here's a fact, Mr. Speaker. In 2007, Nova Scotia had more bankruptcies per capita than any other province in Canada. And I'll table this text, this figure, total bankruptcies per capita, provincial, 2007, from the Nova Scotia Department of Finance. It's not from the member from Cape Breton South or the Liberal finance critic, it's from the Department of Finance. And it shows that we are dead last in terms of the country. Alberta is #1 and we're dead last. So I want to table that document. That is not fiction, as we heard from the government. That is a fact. Another fact, Mr. Speaker, the province actually lost jobs. The Premier was waxing eloquent about the 10,000 new jobs that we created in Nova Scotia. Well, we have some more facts here. And this fact here is talking about jobs in Nova Scotia, and again, it's from the Nova Scotia Department of Finance. And I'll table this as well. It shows that since we've lost jobs since 2002, and in the last year, we're down from 443,000 in 2005, which is the figure I believe the Premier used earlier, to 2006, 441,000. Now that doesn't translate into a 10,000 increase. That translates into a 2,000 job loss. And I'll table that. That's from the Department of Finance, not from the member from Cape Breton South or our financial critic, but their own Department of Finance. In addition, Mr. Speaker, another fact is that our province registered 700 fewer companies than we did the year before last. I have another update here, and this is from the CFIB, and that's the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, of course, and the Small Business Outlook, and this is their take on this, the Small Business Outlook has dimmed further as massive shifts in commodity prices and exchange rates tear through the economy. Optimism is now near the lowest level recorded by the CFIB, and they're talking about Nova Scotia here, and that's dated October 30th. Guess when October 30th was? Today. You know, this is from the CFIB. That's not consistent with the rosy picture that the Premier was. And if you look at the graph, it's going straight down in terms of the economy. So I'll also table that document. And the Premier states that Nova Scotians will not feel the economic effects for 6 to 8 months. And Mr. Speaker, this is how out of touch we are here. And we've been feeling the effects for some years now. And I've got to tell you, Mr. Speaker, earlier today in question period, our leader asked a simple question of the Premier. If the Premier was going to get involved in trying to redirect the economy of Halifax in terms of what he'd like to see, and we don't disagree with the need for more development in Halifax. As a matter of fact, we would welcome it. But you know what? We, in the Liberal Party, feel that the Premier should be just as bullish about demanding that Nova Scotia Power not be given an increase this year, and if they do get one, cancel it. You know, and the people will come and they will tell you that the government cannot get involved in the operations of the Nova Scotia Power Incorporated, nor can they get involved in the UARB decisions. Well, somebody should have told the government that when they changed the decision of the UARB in the Chester case. You know, so politics is a wonderful thing. If it's politically expedient for the government to take a stand and overturn a decision or reverse a decision of the UARB, they don't have any problem doing it. But when it comes to dealing with power rates that are put on the backs of Nova Scotians and are continuing to rise in this province and eventually will drive people out of their homes or drive competitive business away, they sit back and do nothing. That is not leadership from this government or this premier. We need to get more people back to work, Mr. Speaker, and we can do that. And I refer now to those people who are still dependent on community services in this province. What we should be doing, instead of continuing to claw back from community services recipients in this province, we should be offering incentives for community service recipients to break the cycle and get out in the workplace. And the way to do that is to allow them to earn so much money in the private sector or in government, wherever they're working, without a clawback from community services for a period of time to give them a head start. That's long overdue in this province and should be seriously considered by the Minister of Community Services. And Mr. Speaker, in Nova Scotia, the census now, I'm not talking about, again, the House Leader for the Liberal Party, our finance critic, our leader, our researchers, I'm talking about the census, showed that 14 out of 18 regions in Nova Scotia had a decline in population in the past number of years. A decline. Another fact, Mr. Speaker, business confidence, as tracked by the Canadian Federation of Business, is at an all-time low. And that is not the fiction that came from that side a little while ago. That's the facts that are out there. Now, Mr. Speaker, we talk about energy for a moment, and you know, this is something that really has bugged me over the years. We have the last major project that was significant in Nova Scotia in the offshore energy business that generated a great deal of interest and a great deal of spending by international companies was the Sable project back in 1998, 99, in a John Savage, Russell McClellan government. The businesses that were located to Halifax in those years, we all know, Hollis Street, Barrington Street and those places were full of international companies doing business in Nova Scotia. What have we had since? We've had Newfoundland going ahead with the offshore industry. We've lost decisions in the Scotian Shelf over the past few years. We're doing nothing with major offshore except taking leases back, therefore helping us to balance the books on the strength of major oil companies giving up leases in this province. What a way to balance the books. We get money back from companies who don't want to do business here anymore. And that's what's been happening. We need as well, Mr. Speaker, to make our local business more competitive in this province, and we have to provide the environment for them to do that. What I've seen and what I've noticed that it's a day-to-day operation of this government, Mr. Speaker. There's no future planning. And I don't know how long we are going to go, depending on call centers, to keep the numbers of employment up in this province. Because one of these days, those call centers are going to decide there's a cheaper way to do business somewhere else, and they're going to leave. They don't own anything, most of them. They're here on government largesse. I welcome the jobs that they're providing, particularly in my area. But I'm also aware that all they have to do is unbolt the machinery and they're gone. You know, and that happened in the past, and I hope it doesn't happen in the future. But what is our contingency plan if technology changes and we lose those necessary jobs that we have in Nova Scotia? What are we going to replace them with? Now, I want to again refer, Mr. Speaker, to the CFIB independent report, the barometer for October 27th. Here's what they say, and I quote, "The survey results show there is still a full range of expectations among business owners, as only 4% of small firms are looking to perform much stronger in the next 12 months. 4%. 19% report intentions to cut back, 19%. There are also weaker readings from last week that saw 23% expecting to take on full-time staff and 16% looking to make cutbacks. 16% looking to make cutbacks. And 8% anticipate their lot in life is going to be much weaker in the coming months. So I say, Mr. Speaker, the fiction that we've heard over there, the fiction, and we had 15 minutes of rosy projections, growth, economy is strong, we don't have to worry about anything, we can just sit back and wait for the bubble to burst. Well, if we don't start planning here collectively, the bubble is going to burst. And I can tell you that unless we plan for the future, and unless we continue to ensure that we don't slip into deficit in this province, and that we do manage our economy wisely, we're certainly going to be a have-not province. And, you know, it's pretty interesting that Newfoundland is moving this way and we're moving that way. At one time, we used to point to poor Newfoundland and say, you know, Newfoundland is at the bottom of the barrel. Well, guess what, Mr. Speaker? Nova Scotia is at the bottom of the barrel. Thank you very much.
The Honourable, the Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I too am pleased to rise in this House and address members of the Chamber and all those who are listening and will follow the deliberations of what we're doing, because what has been raised by virtue of this emergency debate is a very serious matter, one that I don't believe that any member of this House would try to trivialize, especially if we go with the words that have been stated about willing to work together, willing to find compromise, prepared to look at how we can make minority government work. And Mr. Speaker, while we'll often get into the banter, and I know as is such as we'll debate our numbers. Well, I know our numbers, Mr. Speaker, we rely on Statistics Canada and others, and people will debate back and forth. But there are some fundamentals, Mr. Speaker, about where we are. But to suggest for a moment that this government hasn't been steadfast and focused on the priorities and the needs of a good society based upon the fundamentals of a strong economy that is based upon further a knowledge that we have to diversify our economic base, look to the future, thus the plan for our 2020, the vision the Premier set out, to look at how we deal with strengthening our pillars that support our society across all aspects of that. We all know that it's just as important to have a strong social safety net with a strong economy. We know that an economy is only as strong as the education infrastructure and programs we have in place, and that's why I'm very pleased that we continue to lead the country. Whether that is the work that the minister has done and the agreements that were signed with our universities to make sure that we have the programs and plans in place. When people put opportunities before this government, Mr. Speaker, we deal with those and seek to move forward based upon progress and growth. When you think, Mr. Speaker, as well of what our Nova Scotia Community College has done with the training and the education of individuals in this province, that the programs from the Department of Community Services working with Labour and Workforce Development and the ability and the confidence of the Government of Canada to transfer that responsibility to this province, so we continue to expand that. To suggest that older workers in this province has been forgotten, well, I was just at a graduation, Mr. Speaker, for older workers that are very proud and confident that people reached out, brought them in and helped lift them up to greater opportunity. That the working families of this province, Mr. Speaker, by significant numbers. And I'm pleased of one statistic. People can say, but what's going down? But there is one number that has gone down in this province the last number of years, Mr. Speaker, and that is those on income assistance because they're out as productive members of the economy with their work hands in hand, sitting at their family tables with confidence because they are valued by a government that understands we must invest holistically across all areas. And I look forward to using my time tonight, Mr. Speaker, to talk about that. But I also, in looking at this emergency debate, had an opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to reflect that when I came into this legislature in 2001, and so did the member for Halifax-Fairview, in those by-elections, and I also recall that when the government came to power in 1999, that it entered a process where tough decisions were made to deal with the fiscal challenges that were faced. And I also remember, Mr. Speaker, that decisions were made at the federal and provincial levels in my own area that affected the closure of the mining industry in terms of DevCo. I know during that very by-election in 2001, Mr. Speaker, I had to deal with the closure of Cisco at that time and dealt with it day in and day out in the campaign trail. So it was either a choice I had as a candidate to blame my own party and go down the road of the negative spin that people would have, or stand up and say it was important to get to the government table, to have a voice from that region that could reach out and deal with that. And I also, Mr. Speaker, at that time leading up to it, recognized the impact of a fundamental shift in an economy where people were uncertain, where they were fundamentally afraid of what would occur for them and their loved ones, the ability for people to be there. And I also remember, Mr. Speaker, when the opportunity was there, communities came together. Groups came together. Organizations worked. Business worked. The church community came together because they were not prepared to give up. And what I know is this, and in politics we often say you're better off today than you were yesterday, and I know and can speak with confidence that from 2001 to 2008, great progress and strides have been made. We've worked through varying challenges, but it was about the fundamentals. So I know if you are, as we all are, concerned about the economics globally that are impacting our country, our region, and our province. But I also know you don't run away from it. You have to deal with those realities, admit what those challenges are, but move forward with confidence and conviction that we have the fundamentals in place. And Mr. Speaker, I can tell you, this province is positioned extremely well to deal with the challenges that the marketplace right now are putting forward. And as was indicated and evidenced by the previous speakers, by the Premier and the Deputy Premier, when they talked about those with confidence to come here, because of the fiscal stewardship and management in this province, we have people that look to us as that standard bearer, and people that want to talk about the HRM and the challenges around development and why we be concerned about real estate development. Well, I know this, with confidence, Mr. Speaker, we move forward to deal with the realities of the marketplace, but also recognize the people that have moved here, that have put international investment here, that have created highly paid, high-skilled jobs for Nova Scotians to reside here, to allow immigrants to have an opportunity to come here, to see that opportunity and leverage their experience and expertise. That's a balance we have. But we also, Mr. Speaker, in Halifax are in the capital of this province. And it is in the interest of the people of this entire province that this capital be strong and solid, and that this capital have the opportunities to grow and strengthen itself. So, Mr. Speaker, while we may differ on our interpretation of the statistics and the numbers, what I can say is that I stand confidently as a member of the Progressive Conservative government to deal with the challenges we have. And, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to talk about some of the things people have said that are wrong. Well, we'll all stand here and restate the obvious, because I disagree with the Leader of the Official Opposition when he suggested and said that there's dead-end jobs. Well, I'd like to know his definition of who the people are in the dead-end jobs, because I know the people, Mr. Speaker, that have great confidence, Mr. Speaker, and know, Mr. Speaker, that the NDP... Well, I agree. I can hear the banter in the House. And I agree that the NDP agenda is genuine because they do have a raw deal for Nova Scotians, working families. And it's a raw deal because they want to talk well. They talked about cooperation. I heard these lofty, the member of Cape Breton South talks about waxing on eloquently. Holy smokes, he must have been giving good lessons, the Leader of the Official Opposition, for going on and contradicting himself. And it's just like the raw deal that the socialists have for Nova Scotians, where they want to give with their words, but they'll take from the wallets of average working Nova Scotians, and they'll go right to their dinner tables to take it, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I know that the socialists will have their chance to talk about their vision and how indeed they will provide confidence, not comfy words, but confidence to the people of this province so they know where we go. Well, they can rest assured as this, that they have 7 consecutive balanced budgets by this government. We have a debt management plan that is seeing that debt decrease in this province, Mr. Speaker. We're seeing the bond rating agencies continue to have confidence to increase our ratings. But most importantly, those ratings speak about positioning this province to come out of any economic challenges, the leader in Atlantic Canada and, in fact, all of Eastern Canada. When you look at they talk about unemployment stats, when I know that Nova Scotia's unemployment statistics here in this region are 23% lower than Toronto and 24% lower than Montreal, that as a regional centre, we have the capacity. It's not about suggesting we are not going to have to make difficult decisions, because it's been stated that everyone's prepared to come together to make difficult decisions important to the future of the economy of this province. But it means choices. And that is what being in government and a responsible fiscal regime is all about, the balance of choices you make, Mr. Speaker, to go forward. So for Nova Scotians that want to look to how we deal with any of these challenges, they have to look at the choices of this government, Mr. Speaker, to deal with the diversification. I do know that the Minister of Environment has been travelling on the green energy tour of this province, talking about the future opportunities that the green economy can provide, linking them with our infrastructure we have in our utilities, in our energy sector, working with Atlantic provinces, working with the northeastern United States, building opportunities that will see further investment and opportunities into our pipelines that we have there. Working, Mr. Speaker, whether that is in the energy areas that we have, whether that's the tidal demonstration projects that this government and this province stepped up to the plate to see the opportunity to harness the power of the Bay of Fundy, whether that's the wind energy projects, Mr. Speaker, in this province, whether it's the methane gas demonstration projects they're planning in Cape Breton, whether, Mr. Speaker, is about realizing alternate forms of energy, dealing with energy conservation and efficiencies that we have to conserve Nova Scotia. Also, Mr. Speaker, when we talk about that diversification, people suggest there's a pall over the offshore. Well, I also know that there's confidence for people to move forward on Deep Panuke, that indeed from that, with the OSEA, the Offshore Strategic Energy Agreement, we have a $35 million contract recently let in Sydney for the land rigs to supply opportunities to Western Canada, Mr. Speaker. I also know, Mr. Speaker, that ExxonMobil plans to drill in our offshore, that the Minister of Energy is working to do a further exploration, and the interest is there to take up, and that is just some of our offshore opportunities. We see interest in land-based drilling, Mr. Speaker. We see the opportunity in our aerospace industry, whether that is leading. When there was challenges in the aerospace industry, Nova Scotia didn't retreat. It reorganized and rebuilt and moved forward, and that's what we see, whether it's Composites Atlantic, whether it's Pratt & Whitney, where we see it's our aerospace and defense industries that are growing jobs, high-paid, high-quality jobs in this province. That's not moving away from a challenge, it's building opportunity. And where there's adversity, we've always looked at opportunity, and we've dealt with the facts for what they are and to reposition ourselves. And Mr. Speaker, look at Film Nova Scotia. In this province, when there is an international competitive marketplace for the film industry, and everyone knows that it fluctuates, this province has responded to the industry here to deal with the incentives and the opportunities. And what are we seeing? More productions coming to Nova Scotia at a time when they said there'd be no development outside the United States because the dollar was going to do it. Well, you know what? It's Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker, that are bringing opportunities here. It's Nova Scotians that see that and don't run away from the challenges. They reorganize and readjust to make sure that we're well positioned, that we're competitive. Mr. Speaker, when you talk about, for us, information technology, people want to talk about RIM. Well, it was a government of people that looked at the next generation of opportunity, and if anyone said that that was a bad business decision, Mr. Speaker, then I would challenge that. We also can get up and debate. And I remember in this House that the member from Cape Breton South, we had a debate. There was a chance when people go, governments have to make decisions. They have to make choices, but they do it in the interest. And part of it is to have an urban, rural, and regional mix. That's why we have our infrastructure in place. But in the area, when Orenda did not work, I did not, at the time as Economic Development Minister, get up and criticize. I recognized it was a sincere effort. The marketplace wasn't there, and we've moved on to do other things in that region, Mr. Speaker. But I also want to talk about Atlantic Gateway. When people talk about the energy sector, Mr. Speaker, they have to look at also the international marketplace, because there's places in this world that will be impacted but are continuing to grow at a rate beyond ours, and we are well positioned, whether that's the Port of Halifax, whether that is in the Strait region, the Port of Sydney, whether it's around this province. I think of the opportunities in Shelburne and Yarmouth. We have to be part of an Atlantic Gateway solution. I'm very pleased as well that our political minister for Nova Scotia, the Honourable Peter MacKay, is now the minister responsible for Atlantic Gateway, that we will work in partnership, that we will see our infrastructure, that the economic corridors, that the vision, Mr. Speaker, that our Premier put out there. He put priorities and projects, and we're working with the Government of Canada, and we're working as one region beyond political administration to do what's right for the economics of this region. I'm very thankful that we have those opportunities with Canada. We're talking about other infrastructure projects that we can do collectively to see our opportunities for our highway, our economic corridors to grow. And as we work on the engines of that, when we see our railway infrastructure, when we see the development and growth of our airport here, Mr. Speaker, when we look at the opportunities to make sure we have those corridors throughout this region to develop all parts of the region, I think we can stand, not, as some would suggest and bluster, but on the facts of where we've been. And I'll go back to where I started, Mr. Speaker. I came in during very difficult and challenging economic times. And it wasn't about suggesting about what wasn't going to occur in Cape Breton North. It was rolling up our sleeves, getting to work, working with the economy, working with the community, and building an economy. That's what this government will continue to do. So if we're going to be sincere about working together, we also have to recognize it is about the balance and the choices we have to do to keep us on that stead. And I'm glad the Leader of the Official Opposition said we can't go and not manage our debt management plan, because that's part of the choices that he'll have. But I know, Mr. Speaker, where there's a will, there's a way, and Nova Scotians have always led the way, and I'm confident we'll continue.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there is a global economic crisis that is upon us. It is likely to be like nothing that we have ever seen before in our lifetime. Mr. Speaker, we have bank failures and insolvencies around the world. We have a credit crunch, a lack of liquidity that is going to affect every economy in every country in the world. It's like being on a ship, Mr. Speaker, and a big wave is about to break over us. Mr. Speaker, but what the problem with the debate so far tonight is it's like three people are on the deck of that ship, and the one wearing the blue shirt says, as the wave is breaking over the ship, "This is the best ship we've ever seen, isn't it?" And the fella on the deck with the red shirt says, "No, this is the worst ship we've ever seen." Or as one of the fellows with the red shirt says, and I don't know how he can say this in this House, Mr. Speaker, he said, quote, "Nova Scotia is at the bottom of the barrel," end of quote. So meanwhile, while the guys with the blue shirts and the red shirts are fighting over whether it's a good ship or a bad ship, the third fella on the deck, the one in his working clothes, is looking at the wave breaking over the ship and saying, "Come on, everybody, we have to hang together or we're all going to get washed overboard," Mr. Speaker. Now, the Liberal Party has brought this resolution forward, and that's a good thing, but the Liberal leader got up and said it's time to put partisanship and sniping aside, and yet from the next Liberal speaker, we got 15 minutes of pure partisanship. Now, Mr. Speaker, that is not what the people of Nova Scotia are looking for. That is not what the people of Nova Scotia need. We need to work on this together. We are ready to work on this problem, Mr. Speaker, and we are looking for a willingness on the part of the other parties to work on this together. We have to distinguish between what is within the control of the provincial government and what is not. And we have to say very frankly, there is a great deal about this global financial crisis that is not within the control of the provincial government. Our provincial government has no ability to affect, directly or indirectly, banking, interest rates, foreign currency, transfer payments, commodity prices, or any of a host of other factors that are part of that wave that is about to break over our economy, Mr. Speaker. However, there are a number of items that are within the control of the provincial government. And what we are looking for, Mr. Speaker, and I think what the people of Nova Scotia are looking for, is decisive consultative action by the government on those issues that are within their control. And Mr. Speaker, the first item, which has an impact on all the others, of course, is public finance. And Mr. Speaker, there are only, when you get right down to it, a few very simple elements of public finance. And so far in this House, we all agree on deficit spending. We cannot revert back to deficit